is 7 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. And as people are coming in, I'll kind of just repeat a little bit of our introduction in the next 5 minutes so that people have a chance to get settled in and get a chance to know who we are and what we're doing. So in the next 5 minutes, it might be a little bit of repetition, but just bear with me. All right, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first ever Cobb County Schools Budget Information Session hosted by Watching the Funds-Cobb. And I am Jessica Bergeron. I'm one of the co-founders of Watching the Funds-Cobb, and I'll be leading the discussion tonight and basically moderating the conversation. And I think it's important to tell you a little bit about who I am as people are coming in. I'll continue to just give our introductions, and then I'll kind of turn it over to our other panelists. Our Watching the Funds-Cobb group is a group of moms. We're co-founded in January 2021. And we wanted to do what no one else was doing, which was tracking how the school board and the superintendent were spending our tax dollars. So again, we're just a group of moms who were interested and started asking some questions about how is this money being spent? And again, I'm a mom. I have 3 children, and I had 2 kids who are currently, or 2 kids who are in Cobb County. I have one currently in Cobb County, and absolutely love all of our schools and love all of the school leaders that are a part of the work that make our kids' education successful. And just really love living here in Cobb County and love the schools and the school system. And I think that makes it even more important that we ask questions about the budget to make sure that we have a lot of, that our schools that are great schools are really just continuing to be stellar. So again, this is sponsored. This is our first ever sponsored by Watching the Funds-Cobb. And we're here to answer some questions about the Cobb County Schools budget. And Watching the Funds is a group of moms who started in January 2021. And we were tracking how the school board and the superintendent were spending our tax dollars. We're moms, wives, business owners, and school volunteers. And we all pay property taxes for our schools. And we had some questions about what we were seeing, specifically about the $12 million of the CARES Act funding that was approved and ultimately was spent on UV lights and hand washing stations way back when during COVID. And soon after we flagged these purchases, the UV lights failed. And now we know that the hand washing stations never actually killed COVID-19. They frequently were in need of repairs, and now they're not even being used. The price tag for the installation of the hand washing stations alone was nearly $10 million. And that was just in our first few months when we started. Since then, Watching the Funds-Cobb has advocated for fiscal responsibility, which is sound spending of all of our tax dollars, accountability, oversight, and transparency. So that's who we are and why we're here. And this is the work that we'll continue to do. If you're interested in learning more about Watching the Funds-Cobb, we're on Facebook. We can also be reached by email. And we're also on Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter. And today we're going to go ahead and get started with our session related to the Cobb County Schools budget. And we have 2 special guests who have graciously agreed to join us tonight. And I just want to give y'all who are listening here, we've got about 22 participants, a little bit of background about our school board. We have 7 members of our school board, and all of them were actually invited to this session. So we had all 7 members were given an invitation, and we have currently 2 people who are here to discuss this Cobb County Schools budget. And we're really excited that they're here and are ready to hear answering questions from our participants, as well as some of the frequently asked questions that we get as watching the Funds-Cobb. And the other thing that I want to mention is that our school board is actually bipartisan. And a lot of people don't necessarily know that we are a bipartisan school board. Every school board in the state of Georgia is not bipartisan. Some of them are nonpartisan, but our school board is bipartisan. So we have 4 members who are representing the Republican Party and 3 members who are representing the Democratic Party. So it's a Republican-controlled school board. And I think that's just interesting. That's important for us to mention because, this is something that I think that we've heard a lot from the parties about fiscal responsibility, and it's very much in line with the work that they have, advocated for. So we are excited to talk about fiscal responsibility because we think that that is a nonpartisan issue that both parties really have a lot to contribute to. So one of the things that we want to highlight tonight and then I'll introduce our guests, is that the board majority made some changes to some of our fiscal policies. And we just want to make sure that we are able to ask some questions about and raise some, raise attention to that. One of the things that I want to mention is that prior to the board's final adoption of the budget, the board shall hold public hearings to explain the proposed budget and invite questions and discussion from the administration and the public. Unfortunately, that policy has changed. So that's something that's one of the reasons why it drove us to want to do this particular session, is because we know that people have questions. So couple of housekeeping items. If you have questions, you can drop your questions in the Q&A. If you raise your hand, we probably won't see it. So just drop your question in the Q&A. We have a moderator who's moderating the Q&A so that we can make sure we get your questions answered. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. We have, and again, for those of you who are just joining us, we now have 26 participants. We did invite all 7 members of our school board to attend this session. And graciously, we have 2 school board members who have agreed to join. And I'm just going to say their names, and then I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. We have Becky Sayler from Post 2 and Nichelle Davis from Post 6. So Becky, you go ahead and introduce yourself and then pass it over to Nichelle.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much Watching the Funds and Jessica for hosting this. This is something Nichelle and I talked about wanting to do last year, but we're newbies. Last year was our first budget season. So now that we're in our second budget season, we feel more able to be able to take questions and try to give some education of the things we've been recently learning. So I'm on my first term on the Cobb School Board. I'm a teacher and a mom. I currently teach preschool, and I'm a former Cobb County teacher. I have 4 children in the Cobb County schools, and that includes the schools that I represent. So I'm in the Post 2 is like the south and central part of the county. So parts of Smyrna, parts of Mableton, unincorporated Cobb County. It's Bernie, King Springs, LaBelle, Milford, Nickajack, Norton Park, Russell Elementary, Betty Gray, Campbell, Floyd, Griffin, and Lindley Middle Schools, and then Osborne High School. And so particularly with Nichelle Davis and Post 6, we have a lot of overlapping feeder schools. So like a lot of those schools feed into Campbell High School, and she represents Campbell High School. A lot of my middle schools, Betty Gray and Lindley, feed into Trey Hutchins and Post 3. So we often work together a lot on those issues that kind of come up in our region of the county. But I'm excited to be here tonight and talk more about this. It's definitely a work in progress learning. And as one member of the board, I'm only speaking for myself. We cannot speak on behalf of the board. Neither of us is the board chair. So we'll be telling you kind of what we've learned and what we see. And if there are things that we don't know, I'll be happy to write the question down and try to get you an answer that's more thorough. But thank you for taking an interest and for being here tonight.
Thank you. Nichelle?
Hey, good evening, everyone. Again, my name's Nichelle Davis, and I am a former teacher in Cobb County and other parts of the country. And I taught for several years, and then I am now in the education landscape still, but on the operations side at an education nonprofit. So still tapped into education issues, just a different viewpoint of it. So really excited to continue my work in education in that role professionally, but also serving on the board and serving our constituents and our students. Because I love students. And I'm just really excited to, continue that work in this capacity. And just a little bit more about the areas I represent. It's parts of Smyrna over to kind of that East Cobb border, like Powers Ferry and all of that. So like Becky said, the high school I represent is Campbell High School in Cobb Horizons, which is our non-traditional high school in the county. And then East Cobb Middle School and Pearson Middle School. And then a lot of the elementary schools. So the ones Becky doesn't have that's in Smyrna, I have them over to like Powers Ferry, Soap Creek, Sedalia Park. And that's kind of my corridor, just to give you a little context of where I'm situated in the county. And again, that's post 6. And I'm just really excited. Like Becky said, we wanted to do this for a while, but the learning curve as we're new board members was very serious. So now I feel like we have a strong understanding. We ask questions and want to share that directly with our constituents. So just excited to have this opportunity. So thank you to Watching the Funds-Cobb for facilitating this. To Dr. Jessica, thank you for moderating this experience, and just really excited to be here with y'all tonight.
Okay, well, great. Thank you. Okay, so if you're just now joining us, we do have 29 participants. So we're going to go ahead and get started in a minute. Again, this is Watching the Funds. We are supporting this webinar. We're hosting this webinar. We did ask all 7 members of the Cobb County School Board if they would like to join. And we are here today with Becky Sayler from Post 2, Nichelle Davis from Post 6. If you have a question, you can put the questions in the Q&A, and we are only going to address questions. We only have time to address questions related to the budget, procurement, spending, financial policies and practices, projects and investments. So we're not going to veer off into other questions, but we're going to focus on, although financial fiscal responsibility affects almost everything in the Cobb County schools, we want to make sure we're focused on that for the purpose of this webinar. We'll get to as many questions as we can. And then if we, just like Becky said, if we don't have the answer, we'll try to either link it in the chat or we'll post it on our Facebook page and give people opportunities to read up on their own. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and share the budget overview, or we're drop the link in the chat to.
Actually, can you just ask Becky and Nichelle
Okay.
what they're hearing?
Okay, perfect. I will do that.
Out there. Thank you.
So Becky and Nichelle, I'd like to start off by asking you, now that you're both going into your second budget session, what are you finding that taxpayers are unclear about as it relates to general funding, SPLOST funding, maybe federal money, state money? What are some of the things that you're unclear, that you're finding that your constituents are unclear about or other taxpayers are unclear about? And I'll go ahead and start with Becky and then go to Nichelle.
Sure. I think one of the most surprising things for people is that we have lots of different pots of money. So when we talk about this budget being 94% salaries, sometimes people are like, that's no way to run a business, but we really do rely on the budget for salaries. That's the biggest chunk of it, obviously. SPLOST projects are how we do everything from major construction projects to even curriculum purchases, like a textbook adoption. It can be through SPLOST. And then, of course, we have the CARES Act money that came through, and that has been used to fund, in addition to the unfortunately unpopular items that happened, I'll say, before Nichelle and I were there, there's been some really great programs like summer school and positions for reading interventionists and that sort of thing were through COVID money. So there's different pots that we get our money from. This is the biggest one in terms of like how we pay people, and it's the one that we have all the taxpayer bill of rights around. There's another few things too that I kept hearing from people. One is that some people don't know about the senior exemption. So if you're 62 or older, you can be exempt from paying school taxes. So look that up on the Cobb County webpage. I would get some emails from people saying, you know, I'm on a fixed income, I can't afford it, I'm retired. And I'm like, great news for you. You don't have to pay school taxes. And also that the school system does not assess the property. The tax assessor's office is completely separate from the county, and they're looking at fair market value of homes. We have no control over that, including when they send it out. So they're really great in working with us and kind of giving us a heads up of what they expect the value to be so that the budget can be made. But we don't control the timing of those or what that amount is. You know, we can't control that value assigned to property. And that, you know, the school system, we have to adopt a budget by July 1st because that's when the new fiscal year starts. And so often you don't get that millage rate digest sent out to taxpayers and made public until after that date, because we have to start a new school year to start paying the teachers their new yearly, you know, rate and salary. But the millage rate digest does not go out. That's not to say the tax assessors don't do a good job. They do an excellent job, and particularly Cobb is quicker than most. I've heard horror stories of other counties where they have to do like a tax anticipation notice, which is essentially a payday loan to make their payroll because the tax assessors haven't done their jobs yet, you know. So we're in great shape in Cobb that we have that going on. But because the millage happens after the budget, sometimes there's been some disgruntlement about that feeling like it's already set, because to have a budget, you have to have an assumed millage rate. Otherwise you can't calculate it out. So there's really no way for the board to fix that. That's just the timing of how it works. So I'm glad that these 30 people are involved and listening, because this is really the time to make your voice heard. Like once the budget is set, to go in and change the millage would mean cuts to the budget that's been adopted, which with 94% of it being salaries would most likely impact what we're paying people.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'd heard a couple things that you hit on about the property tax exemption, how important that is for people who are over what age did you say again?
62.
62. And you also talked about the millage rate, which we'll get into a little bit more later on. And then about how, you know, basically over 90% of the budget goes towards salaries. So I'm going to move over to Nichelle and give her an opportunity to answer this question about what are the areas where you are seeing that a lot of taxpayers are unclear about as it relates to the Cobb County Schools budget?
All right, thank you. So Becky covered a lot of what I also am hearing. We're kind of, you know, situated similarly, community-wise. But a lot of it is really just a general understanding of the budget and why is it increasing every year, right? Like, why is that increasing? And then we also see the property tax, the millage rate, everything around that, as it has direct implications and impact on families. That's a huge thing where our constituents and our community members are just like, we don't understand what's going on. Why can't you guys just roll back the money? Why can't we just, you know, like not be hit as hard in our tax bill, basically, you know? So that's a lot of the concern also that I'm hearing. And then also just a lack of understanding on our budget period and how, you know, it is increasing each year, and basically what goes into it and what it all like covers, especially since we do have, you know, election time comes around and we vote on SPLOS every few years. And so it's just general like knowledge of like the workings of the whole financial piece when it comes to our school district is basically what I'm hearing as major concerns.
Yeah. So I heard from you, I think it's also important to repeat is that the tax rate or the property tax assessment is not something that's controlled by the school board. So I think both of you guys mentioned that. I think that's important. It's on a lot of our minds, those of us who own houses in Cobb County and pay property taxes in Cobb County. I think that it's important to, you know, for people to understand that the property tax assessment is not something that's controlled by the school board. And the property tax exemption is also not something that's controlled by the school board. So I think it's important to make note of that so that people really understand that. And the other thing that I've heard a lot that has come up is, if I'm a senior and I'm not paying property taxes, why should I be concerned about Cobb County Schools budget, or why should I be involved in what's happening with the Cobb County schools? And I'll let Nichelle answer this first if you'd like to go.
Sure. Well, one thing is, and I would even take it one step further and not only be like if you're a senior and you're exempt from paying it, but also I hear sometimes like there's a large population of residents that rent and they're not necessarily paying taxes, directly to schools or funding that either. And the conversation sometimes becomes one and the same, where it's you might not be funding the bucket of money or a local budget for our school district, but this is literally our students. This is our future of our community. And whether you rent right now or you're exempt, a lot of our elderly population also have family members that live within Cobb County. So we're talking about really the next generation, but it has economic impacts in terms of the businesses we attract based on the performance of our schools. It impacts who your neighbors might be and look like and all of that. So it definitely, even if it might not directly show up in your tax bill, there's implications for future also beyond just this moment. And what we do today literally will have repercussions for later as we move forward and based on really our young people, because as I don't know who said it, but I remember hearing one time, the students are 100% of our future. The young people are 100% of our future. And the things we do today is preparing them for that future and what that might look like. And that goes for our elderly population, 62 and above, that are exempt, and also our renters, and also the young professionals, also a lot of them I've spoken with that are like, well, I don't even have kids yet. Like, why does that impact me? So it's really all those different groups that when you start to think about it, you live in this community and what happens in this community matters and will impact you, if not today, maybe tomorrow.
Great. Becky, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Sure, I'll add that, Georgia as a state has identified public education as a value. It's something guaranteed in our state constitution. So we have identified it as a value, and then certainly within Cobb County, it's a value, which is reflected in your vote on school board. You vote for the school board members. It's not something you only vote for if you have children in the schools or if you, are part of that world. It's every single citizen in the county votes on the school board. And then one more thing I should have said earlier about the senior exemption, the school board has no control over that. That's something that the state legislature controls. There are different senior exemptions that have more, we have the most I guess the least restrictions on the senior exemption. Other counties have different restrictions. And so that leads some people to believe that we have control. We really don't. I guess the most that the school board could do would be to make a recommendation, but we have no control over that. And it's often used in different campaigns to say that I'll keep it. We can't make you any promises about that. We have no control. So if you have a thought about that, talk to your state legislatures because they're the ones that are in control.
Those are great points. And I'll also add, and it just occurred to me, full disclosure as myself, because we all at Watching the Funds really want to be, make sure that we're putting out open and honest information. So full disclosure about myself, I am an educator. I'm a licensed special education teacher in Georgia. I currently live in Cobb County, and I am sold my house in December. So as I was saying, I was like, okay, I'm a property owner. I was like, you know what? I'm not a property owner anymore. I sold my house in December, but I still live in Cobb County and I rent actually from a family member. And, as you were talking, Nichelle, it really made me think about, why do I care about property taxes, or why do I care about the school system? Not just because my kids are in the school system, but also why does that matter to me? And as an educator, I can speak to the fact that, your property taxes, yes, we're seeing a lot of tax assessments going up, but the value of houses for property taxes is directly impacted by the quality of the schools. So as we're thinking about, what does this mean to me if I'm a renter, if I have the senior exemption for the schools, then it's still, the schools do have a major impact on what the value of your house is when it comes time to sell your house, or it has a major impact on the type of people that are living in your neighborhood, and the type of schools that your children can go to, regardless of whether or not that you are even if you don't have kids, or even if you're not a property owner. Our neighborhoods and our communities are dependent on our schools. So it's important for us to remember that, even if we're not paying taxes or property owners. So I do want to ask a follow-up question just about some of the budget changes. So starting with Becky, what are some of the major changes that have happened this year with the with Cobb County Schools budget?
Sure. And that is the biggest thing to talk about, because the budget is basically the same as last year, with some additions that you're seeing with this increase in the final cost. So some of the important things to note is that there are things that we used to be able to fund through different avenues that we now are having to roll into the budget. I talked about those different pots. CARES Act money has dried up. So the summer school program that we saw was so successful for getting credit recovery, for helping kids graduate as close to on time as possible. That's now going to be part of our budget. So that's like a $2 million. I'm going to put my reading glasses on to see. That's a $2 million addition to the $2.5 million addition to the budget. Another thing of interest is that all of the benefits that we pay in, the employer contribution is raising significantly. So that's a really big expense for us, as that is something we really value. Want to give our teachers good health care, good benefits. That amount we have to contribute is going up. Teachers get step increases when they are there a certain number of years, or when they have a higher degree. And so that increase is $54 million. And that's an exciting amount to be able to give out, because that represents teachers who are committed to the district, who've been here a long time and are furthering their education. And I really believe that translates to a better experience for the kids in school. In addition, something else people might not know is that when the governor announces raises for teachers, we don't have so the state funds that we get state funds, local funds, and a little sliver of federal funds at schools. And the amounts that we get from the state, they fund a quality basic education. And it is basic. There are no frills. So not every teacher at your child's school or in your community school is funded by that QBE. We might have funded one through a grant program or by federal title funds. So when the governor announces he's going to give $2,000 raises to every teacher or every employee in the school, that's great, but he only gave us $28 million. But what it costs to actually give the raise to all of our employees is $54.7 million. So we have to kick in $26 million to add that raise. So those are some of the biggest items that are being added. In addition, and Nichelle, maybe you want to take this one about the special ed teachers. Do you want to add that part?
Sure, yeah. So even a part of this budget, it funds 20 additional positions, 17 of which are for special education, 3 of which are custodial. And basically, prior to this year, the special ed positions were grant funded, but now we have to move them into the budget. Again, kind of like Becky said, when certain grants, dry up, such as CARES funding and things like that, then we still find it valuable to keep those positions and keep whatever that initiative was, kind of like our summer program. And that then becomes a part of our ongoing budget. So we're including it here, which was 17 of the SPED positions and then 3 custodial. And that was because of the additional square footage. So based on that, 3 additional positions were required. So that's kind of where that came from. And I'll just also add in some other things that basically were new. And we do have the links dropped to directly the tentative budget that's out there circulating. So if you want to kind of look at some of those high level things, but we did have also one-time expenditures that come out that we approved in FY24. So we have to subtract those out. But then in addition, the health insurance, just wanted to make a point on that. Becky did bring it up. And originally for classified employees, the state basically and governor, they said, okay, we need to increase it based on the legislation that was passed, all of that, it was supposed to be a 3-year phase in. So it was separated over 3 years. However, what ended up happening, this is year 2 now. And they said, oh, just the rest of it, you have to do it this year. So again, that's something that wasn't prior anticipated, because we were planning for 3 years, but now the second half of that amount. So now it went up in FY24, it cost us 9.5 million. This fiscal year that is proposed in this budget, it's 14.7. So it's all the rest. So kind of when we talk about some things being partially funded and even being told oh, we're going to phase this in over 3 years, and then it's like a surprise, no, do it all right now. That's kind of how that number also played and factored into this FY25 budget. So again, that's where you're seeing some of these increases going up. And then also the increase in the TRS. So everybody wants to eventually retire, at least I hope so, for our teachers and our staff and all eligible employees. So there's an increase that's basically about 1%, from 19.98 to 20.78%. So still about 6% contribution for employees, but it is an increase that we had to factor into this budget as well. And just kind of giving y'all a little more context on some learnings that we've had over the time. Something that came up, of course, last fiscal year, the one that we're currently in, really, FY24, but also looking ahead, is how around school safety. That's a really big thing, right? So you asked before, what else is the concerns of the community? School safety is a concern, and it will continue to be a concern. So some things that we've now seen is the state-supported school security grant, which is 111 schools at $45,000. So here's the thing. Again, the money is now approved, but we're still waiting on guidance. What are the rules around it? How can it be used? All of that. So I know that community members had questions about that. And yes, the money is now included because it is approved, but further guidance is not available at this time. So that's another thing kind of to note, that we're saying these things, but when you ask, hey, what all does this entail? I don't know. We don't know. Not yet, so kind of wanting to put that out there as well. And then the increase in the safety and security funds for extracurricular events at each of our 16 traditional high schools. So currently we've been providing $4,000 to each high school for those things that are extracurricular. But now we're going to up that, and each school will get an additional $10,000. So they're going to get collectively $14,000 to go towards that safety piece and all the things that are extracurricular at their school. So those are just some of the things included in this budget that might not have been there before, but based on what Becky shared, salary is huge all the time. It makes up most of our budget. And then the other 6%, because we didn't really talk about it, 94% is salary and fringe benefits, right? So we're talking about those benefits as well. Then the other 6, what it takes for us to operate our district, which is why it's so important to acknowledge the different pots of money, including SPLOS, because there's no way that 6% would go towards covering every single school building, the maintenance of it, all of that, all of our larger projects without SPLOS. So also, I think it's so valuable for the community to understand why SPLOS is so important for the district to be able to function, honestly, because if that was the case, 94% of this budget could not go to salaries and fringe benefits solely, because we still have to maintain our buildings and do all those other things instructionally that need to also be included, which right now fits into 6% outside of SPLOS. So
yeah, and I think, and I'm reading through some of the Q&A questions, and I think there's still a little bit of confusion about the difference between the millage rate and the tax assessment. So I want to give you both a chance to talk about the millage rate, because that is something that is part of the role of the school board is to talk about them, to just give you all a chance to talk about the millage rate. And just maybe give a little bit, repeat some clarification about the tax assessment, to make sure that people are hearing that that's different than the millage rate. So Nichelle started, I think Nichelle started last time. Wait.
It doesn't matter. I'll give a
Okay,
high
all right,
level,
okay.
really
So,
simplified.
I'll let Becky start this time. And just repeat what you said about the tax assessment versus the millage rate, and what does the board actually control? Which one does it contribute to? How does the board? And then how does the board impact both of those things? And then I also want to remind everyone that this webinar, everyone was invited to this webinar. All of the school board members were invited to this webinar. And the reason why we invited the school board members is because they are your elected officials. Watching the Funds-Cobb is here to talk about budget and finance for the Cobb County School Board, or the Cobb County schools. But the board is the group of people that are elected officials. They're the ones that represent the people who are voting on here. So when it comes down to, like, say, the superintendent, we don't choose the superintendent. The school board is the accountability body for the superintendent. So I just want to be very clear that the folks who are invited to this webinar were the school board, because they are our elected officials. They're the ones who represented. Everyone was invited. These are the two ladies who chose to attend and respond to the people in the community. So again, we're going to talk specifically about the millage rate versus the tax assessment, and the role of the school board for both of those things.
Sure, I can jump in here. So the tax assessor's office is the one who does the tax assessment for your house, decides what the value is. That's based on homes in the area and their selling prices. So we don't have control over that, and we shouldn't, right? The school board should not be saying how much your home is worth. That's something the tax assessor does. What we do have control over is the millage rate. So a mill is 1/1000th of a US dollar, and it's the rate by which your property is taxed. So the state of Georgia has set 20 mills as a limit. There's one county that's like grandfathered in over that, over in DeKalb, they're over that, but we cannot go above 20. And we have one of the lowest in the metro, not the lowest, but one of the lowest in the metro. And also worth noting, in Cobb County, we have one of the lowest costs per pupils as a district. You know, a neighboring district is over 10K above what we spend. So we really are keeping costs down. We especially have a really low overhead cost in terms of district staff compared to most other districts. And in some ways, that's the advantage of being a big school system, because we don't have to have so much overhead for a small number of schools. We have a big ship here to steer. So we do control the millage rate. We vote on the millage rate. And I see another question here about how that money goes into the school system. So when you pay your tax bill to schools, that is a big chunk of the money we get from local funds. Some of the other local funds we get that are much more fun to pay are your liquor by the drink tax and car tag tax. So anytime you're out shopping, you're paying like SPLOST property money, or SPLOST special money that goes towards us. So those are some of the ways we get. And then there's another person who's asked the same question a couple times, and we're not committed to voting either way on it right now. We're in the gathering period of information. We have 2 more public hearings that will happen on May 16th, the day that we make the final vote. And until that point, we really want to hear as much as possible from the community members, as much as possible about, how this budget impacts them. What are the positives? What should we be thinking about? And it's a work in progress until that point. So I hope that answers the questions.
Okay. I think this would also be a good time to talk a little bit about SPLOST. So you've mentioned several times that SPLOST supports additional funds because 94% of the budget goes towards salaries and fringe benefits, and that we have 6% of the budget is spent on, the operating, the costs, the everything else. And then also SPLOST contributes to that. So can you tell us a little bit about decisions and process as it is involved in the allocation of SPLOST, in addition to what SPLOST is? And then also give us a sense of, you've already talked about the importance of it, But give us a sense of, what does that mean? Like a couple of examples of some of the SPLOS projects that have come up as a part of the SPLOS funding.
Jessica, real quick, before we move on to SPLOS, I just want to add in a little bit more about the millage
Sure.
property
Yes, please.
conversation before we move on to that. And just, I guess, just more context in the broader scheme of things also. So just for clarity, everyone, our budget and our revenue. So let's just talk about revenue. The money we have coming in is two main funding sources, right? So we do have our local property taxes, which is 54% of our revenue. And then the state QBE, quality basic education, and what they think, that work out based on all the formulas that no one can tell me what they are because I don't think anyone truly knows what they are. But that makes up 45% of our revenue. And then just a little over 1% is for the federal funds, right? So it's not a lot. So we're thinking basically two main sources of revenue. So I want to make that clear. Your property taxes are really what's funding half of all of the salaries and all of those things, and operational costs, that's at 6%. Now, on top of that, we have 17,000 employees in our school district. We are the largest employer in Cobb County. So you might be paying your neighbor's salary, thanks, at least a part of it. But the idea is, yes, it's going largely to salaries and all those things. Now, when you think about then going back to millage rate and property digest and all of that, 1% of the property digest is roughly about $8 million. So if we think about just a translation, right? Last year, that went up. It was like a 14% increase. It was roughly 14% that we based last year's budget on. This year, it's 7%. So again, that is a really huge fluctuation because prior to that, for like, if you took the average over 30 years past, it was around 4, 5, 6, maybe 7, but it was not ever really this high, right? So last year, we heard a lot of like, what is going on here? That again, the school board and the school district don't have control over that, right? And now thinking about that, the value of 1 mil also, just thinking about the millage, let's just go to the millage. I don't even have to get too deep. So historically, the millage was 18.9 since 2007. So for many years, 18.9 was the millage rate. Last year was the first time, because I just mentioned that the property tax digest was so high, right, that we reduced it by 0.2 mils. So we reduced our millage rate last year, the first time since 2007. That is significant, even though people are like, I still saw an increase in my tax bill. That was still significant because that means we left millions. If we would have just left the millage rate alone, we would have brought in several millions more, right? But we still reduced it. So I also want people to recognize, like, we're trying to make strides to make this like reasonable, but also we still have to fund this budget that you notice, okay, the property digest went down like that percentage, but yet our budget increased. So when you think about that and how that's going, it also has to be incremental in terms of change because we still have to sustain this, right? Every year a teacher might, or whatever the step they're on, they might be increasing the next year. We still have to make sure all that fits within our budget. So our budget can continue to grow and increase, but also we don't set the property tax, right? We don't set that digest based on your house's value. And then they're basically the tax assessor. Remember the tax assessor, they're the ones making that decision in terms of that. All we can then do is think about what millage rate would make sense for us to fund our budget. That's on top of that. So just wanted to make that very clear. So y'all know we're not the ones appraising your house or setting what that tax digest
In
is.
conclusion, the
Yes.
school board does not set the tax, does not assess your property taxes. So yes. And so can you talk a little bit about SPLOST and how those decisions are made and how does it contribute to the overall budget?
So SPLOST is something that we have an oversight committee. We have appointees who kind of hear the SPLOST project. We, as the board, hear SPLOST projects, and then you, as the voters, vote to approve SPLOST projects. And I'll be real honest, if the voters hadn't so wholeheartely and embraced SPLOST and voted to fund it overwhelmingly each time, I really don't know how we would get these schools built. That's the thing that you can see is new school construction, repairs. I'm seeing some of the chat, there's schools that are older in our county and they really need this. And so they're on the list, but it takes a while to get there. And so that is a really big way for us to make these capital improvements to the district.
Okay. All right. So I think that one of the other major questions that's come up is related to foundations. So school foundations raising funds and paying for things like field trips and how does that affect equity if one foundation is raising millions of dollars and another foundation doesn't have the resources to be able to pay or raise that kind of money for those, and again, I just want to remind everybody that I'm the moderator for Watching the Funds. I'm here asking questions of our two school board members, Becky Sayler and Nichelle Davis. All of the school board members were invited, and these two ladies gave us the opportunity to answer questions. So give us a sense of foundation funding and how does that affect equity when some foundations are raising millions and others are not able to do that?
Oh, okay. I was like, is there who you want to start? Okay.
Nichelle.
We'll hop in here as she's an active member on hers. But I do want to point out, yes, foundations and very active PTAs also to some degree are able to raise funds, right? But that also comes from the demographics of their community and their school population, which is why it becomes very important when we talk about equity, why things like Title I, Title II, like other funding exists, because that's supplemental to meet the need for students, right? So foundations, they serve a really great purpose to basically meet needs for students that exist within their schools, and they're tied to their schools. But not every school has a foundation, and oftentimes which schools would not? The ones that might be serving communities that are more economically disadvantaged. And that's why there's supplemental funds that are available to meet that need in the same way. So sometimes a foundation can go and say, okay, well, the school might identify a need for their students. May it be like curriculum or any like extracurricular, or I need my field redone, or I need to beautify, like any of those projects that are like extra. Remember, QBE, quality basic education, doesn't take into account any of that. And our school budget might not meet every single need that a particular class, down to the tissue, the paper towel, like in your classroom, those might not be met by what the school is receiving out of our budget. However, the foundations can then step in that way to support. So that's kind of to get you started, Becky. What else?
Perfect, Nichelle. Yeah, so a lot of our schools that have school foundations or PTSAs that are able to raise a lot of funds are not Title I schools. So Title I schools do receive special funding that is able to step in the gap for some of that. So for example, Title I funds might fund like a parent liaison at the school, or for some extra curricular support at that school. The advantage of foundations and PTSA in a school is that they're able to work quickly. So for example, in some of our schools, the foundations have been paying for Orton Gillingham training or letters training that was aligned with the science of reading before the district as a whole moved in that direction. And so those teachers and those schools were able to have that more quickly. And it does lead to inequity. The good news is that the school district does not have the choice to not be equitable. In order to receive federal funds in particular, state funds, there are weights that are assigned with certain children with their needs, both by the state funds and the federal funds. So we have extra funding to help students who qualify based on living in poverty or being ESOL or Even kindergarten students receive more funding that first year. So there's certain ways that the money follows a student with a special need. And so that's why like the per pupil spending per school doesn't really tell you a whole lot, because that doesn't account for any of the foundation money or the PTSA money. And I want to give a special shout out to the Smyrna Education Foundation and the Cobb Schools Foundation, because they do a lot of great work too to support the schools where there is not the capability of having a parent foundation, where those parents just can't afford that extra money. That's not something that everybody can afford to do. So grateful for those organizations that they are able to, move the ship more quickly. And then the district as a whole catches on. Like now the district is doing letters training district wide. Those are things that we are doing now. And in a certain way, and like this foundation that I was a part of at my children's school, we funded IXL for a few years before the district funded it. So it's kind of like, it's the way of getting a proof of concept, right? Like, oh, this is working. Now we can kind of spread it wide. And I'm very grateful for the way parents are able to pour into schools, but it's a way for us all as community members to be aware that your background and the money you have access to really does impact your education, even in a public school. And so it's something for us to keep eyes on to make sure that our kids are getting a good education, regardless of zip code. It's something on the forefront of our minds, for sure.
And also, I just want to add in there, since we already are like on the topic of funding and equity, right, and how this looks, kind of in direct response almost to, I've got a lot of feedback on the just the facts and Chairman Scamahorn's, his take on the matter of how some school like areas are receiving most of the money. And just kind of want to clear that up because it is directly related to what we just shared in terms of like all of like Trey's schools are Title One. Becky and I have a large portion of Title One schools. So basically, like what Becky said, our schools are receiving additional funding based on certain demographics and certain conditions or situations that exist in our school population, right? And just really when you think of the purpose of Title One funds, is to provide supplemental funding to support educators in improving the academic achievement of students who are economically and educationally disadvantaged. So that's literally what Title I is goal is, to meet that need, right? And when you look at the budget, if you guys ever dive real deep, this binder is huge, and you all have the electronic version available. But that funding goes towards stuff such as the salaries and benefits for teachers, right? That they might provide extra teachers to support those schools that are Title I. It'll go towards like substitutes in those schools, supplemental pay for paras, like our paraprofessionals, to assist teachers with tutoring while off contract because they have different terms, right? Or supporting like our homeless student populations. And also that supplemental pay when we talk about before or after school tutoring, Saturday schools, the summer schools also for our students that need additional support. So you think about what schools need that are designated as Title I. Basically, that's where the additional money is coming from, which is why it seems like, yes, they're getting additional funding, but those schools have additional need, right? So we talk about meeting our students' needs. That's why that exists. And in other schools, they have foundations that, like Becky said, they're ahead of the game because they have access to resources that their foundations can provide. And sometimes the PTSA can provide. So just thinking about how that kind of comes to play, just wanted to provide some more clarity around that.
Yeah, and from an educator's perspective, I can give the audience a little bit of perspective too, as it relates to, for example, literacy. Pre-K is a big predictor of children literacy as they're coming into school. So it's not required for children to attend pre-K or kindergarten in the state of Georgia. So we do have some first graders who are starting school for the first time. And it's important that those students get extra support if they have not gone to pre-K or kindergarten. And the reason why this is important for our school district is because it affects everyone if we have low reading scores. So it can't just be that some people get it and some people don't, or some people go to pre-K and some people don't. We have to make sure everybody has a chance to get the same educational opportunities. So it affects all of our property values when we have higher reading scores in the district. Okay, so let's kind of get to some of the more controversial topics as it relates to the budget. Specifically the $50 million event center is something that is controversial, as well as I want to also mention the VR goggles is something else that has come up that we have asked some questions about the price tag for the goggles as well as the event center. So I wanted to make sure we bring up some of the more controversial topics as it relates to the budget. So I'll just throw that out there for anybody who wants to answer that. Oh, Becky, you're on
I'll be
mute.
happy to jump in on the event center. I am not a fan of the event center. I voted against it in the beginning, and I continue to vote against the steps along the way. But the good news is that is not in this budget. That is being paid for through capital outlay reimbursements and a pot we had of land sales. And so eventually the impact will be in the budget because, as Nichelle mentioned earlier, there's like a certain calculation you have to use of how many maintenance staff you have to have based on square footage. So at some point that would come in, and that's kind of why I continue to be against it. I would love to think that it'll save us money long-term in rental fees. We host a lot of events besides graduations, like the teacher retirement luncheon, staff retirement luncheon, teacher of the year events, classified employee of the year events. So like currently we rent space at the Cobb Energy Center and Roswell Street Baptist and over at Jim R. Miller Park. And so they're at Kennesaw University for graduation. So that's a lot of expense. I would love to think this would help us, but we still don't have those details. And so that's been my hesitation. And again, because of where my schools are, and I go into those schools and I see, the level of attention needed to make them bright and shiny again, it does not make me excited about an event center. So I'm with you on that. But you can rest assured that this budget is not impacted by the event center at this time.
And just want to provide a little more clarity on that. Becky said it really well. It's not in this budget for FY25. And I did ask though, because we have recently voted as a board, the board voted on some actions around it. And the cost, of course, the price tag given to us was $50 million. And a roughly 25 to 30 million were set aside from land sales. And then the additional, say the additional half, 25 million are from capital outlay, but those are reimbursements, right? So I know at one point in one of the prior board meetings, we talked about it coming from general fund at some point and then being reimbursed back to the general fund. Also just wanted to provide a little bit of clarity there that as it stands now, and I asked the question around this is budget season, right? That right now, everything that the board is voting on is coming out of the land money that was set aside first. So not tapping into the general fund at all right now, no implications for that. So it's really using that portion of the money that has been set aside for the project. That's what's being used to do some of these things as we recently had those votes. And then then we'll revisit the conversation about implications on the budget, because again, we don't necessarily know right now what all that will look like. But for now, there's no impact or what's in here in our budget for FY25.
So you mentioned, Becky, that you voted against it and you named a couple of reasons why. And I think transparency has always been a question that we have is, the transparency around some of the issues related to procurement. So tell us a little bit more about how you voted and why you voted against it.
I just had concerns about what I was seeing in the schools as I got to go in them. Capital outlay reimbursement is something that we get from the state after we finish a project. And when we get those funds back from the state, we're able to put it immediately back into SPLOST. So it's like it's been an added driver of SPLOST projects. And so I felt that this might slow down our SPLOST projects. And we're like, some of these schools are like white knuckling it until they can get their new bathrooms or their new gym. They've got, trash cans out when the roof is leaking. And, I know it, I know we get a lot of, why can't you tighten your belts? This to me is an example of we don't need it. And it's a nice to have, but I didn't see it as a need to have. And especially without seeing, in black and white, here's the money savings it would cost. Here's what it could bring in as an event center if we host events. I felt like I didn't have enough information. And I also would love to get us away from, as a board, introducing something brand new and then voting on it on the exact same day we hear it for the very first time. A lot of other school boards in the state have a work session and a voting session divided by like a week and a half to get constituent input, to let you spend more time talking about it publicly, because even though we get the agenda packets early and we're prepared for the meeting, that's, we can't talk about it publicly. So there's that limit. And then in particular, the event center was not something that was detailed in those agenda packets. So I just really want detail before I say yes to anything, right? That's how I parent too. So just really wanting to have a good reason, because I want to be able to tell people, our schools have what they need and we're doing everything we can to get it. And I wasn't sure I could say that if the event center moved forward.
Nichelle, did you want to add anything to that?
I am of a similar mindset in that sometimes things are presented, sounds great, but I think my concern largely at this point, because I voted to not, some of these recent things also support it, because I have not seen any details about what this really looks like long term for us. And things sound great initially, but again, it has to be backed up with like the plan, like the real plan. And we have not seen that yet either. So now I'm struggling to be fully on board, because I'm like, what would have sounded like a nice addition to our district and our offering and how we support our students and have more capacity to do things like STEM Palooza and all the other things that are also, there for students. Like, we don't have that information. So I think like at this point, I'm in a position similar to Becky where I'm hesitant, and also just tying into like what things or discussions I've had with community members too. Even to what I said before is 25 to 30 million roughly was set aside for this project, which is great. But then the concern becomes, okay, so similar to like the foundations versus like Title I, we could expedite fixing our school buildings or expedite some of those other projects that if we use that money differently, funnel it into like our direct needs that exist right now, that would be better use of those funds in terms of like, those are conversations that people are bringing forth, right? And it's hard for me to say or fight that when I feel like transparently, like, okay, I haven't got that information either, and it's hard to back that up without any solid like facts or information in terms of what that long-term plan would be and like how this truly benefits us beyond to infinity and like beyond like, just graduation 1 week of things. And I mean, there is we're going to use it basically almost every day, but on what does this truly look like? Even what are the specifications of like the building? Like, what are the different uses it allows us? Like, we just haven't seen that stuff. So that's kind of where I'm at in a similar